Good to see everybody this morning. You came here because it's warm, didn't you? All right, we're going to continue on with our look at the book of Kings. We've got quite a bit we'll cover this morning. Hopefully, we're going to start in chapter 3. And we'll look at Solomon's reign and the building of the temple and make some, we'll see some things there. But first, I want you to listen as I read this. So this kind of runs in the background when we start reading about Solomon. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it, and you dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as a king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you, who is not your brother. Only he must not require many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. When he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priest. It shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. Deuteronomy chapter 17, before Israel makes their way into Canaan. I just kind of to have that running in the background as we get ready to read about and we look at Solomon. All right? So as we start chapter 3, Solomon is firmly on the throne. His enemies have been defeated. We talked about that last week. And he's done away with those who might do him harm. So he is on the throne. And here we go, chapter 3, verse 1. Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall all around Jerusalem. The people were sacrificing at the high places, however, because no house had yet been built for the name of the Lord. He starts by marrying the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt. Probably not a great thing. Now, scholars vary on this. Some will say this is a sign of, and we'll see a little bit later. We probably won't read through it just because it is a bit tedious, but all of Solomon's administration. Right? But this has something to say about the influence that Israel has at this time, and it's gaining. The kingdom is going to be pretty good sized. As big as it's going to be, I believe, is going to be under Solomon. And so we make an alliance with Egypt, and that seems to be a political move. Right? So a lot of scholars will say that's not a huge deal. Others will point back to Deuteronomy chapter 17. And you will not go back that way again. And instead of going back that way to acquire horses, now we have married the Pharaoh's daughter. All right? Not off to a great start, but we just kind of gloss over that at this point because we got more to look at, and there's more stuff coming. All right, verse 3. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. Only he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings at that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God asked, What shall I give you? And Solomon said, You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father, although I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or to come in. Your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people? Please the Lord that Solomon had asked this, and God said, because you have asked this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what's right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before, and none like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. Solomon awoke, behold, it was a dream. He came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants. The author here of Kings is pointing out something to us, because this phrase, at the high places, is going to play a major role throughout the book. Okay? At the high places. There's a bit of difference on this. Opinions vary. But it does stand to reason, as they call these the high places, that many of these are actually up on in mountain areas. Because it makes sense it makes sense for people that if God is there, right, we ought to get as close as we can. Okay? And so these are the high places. Now, the author here is very careful to say that Israel is sacrificing at the high places because there is no designated temple. Okay? The Ark of the Covenant is in Jerusalem. However, the temple has not been built. So he doesn't really seem to poke too much at Solomon and going, you shouldn't be doing that. Okay? Because this is the way it works for right now. Solomon's at Gibeon when the Lord appears to him and asks, what is it you want? He asked the right thing. He asked for the right thing. I want to be able to do this well. I want to be able to lead your people well. I want to understand good from evil. I want to be able to make the judgments that need to be made. That's part of the king's job, and to do it in the right way. There's been a little bit made of this, Solomon saying, because you've made me your servant, the king, and I'm but a little child. He's not a little kid. Okay. It's just, that's kind of the hyperbole. I'm like a little kid. I don't know what I'm doing here. Right? It's a great position, by the way. One that I hope that we kind of hold in our own mind from time to time, of understanding that we don't know it all. Okay? It's easy for me because I don't know much anything. And you all agree. I see that. Thank you. All right. But that of understanding of going, comparatively speaking, we know nothing. Right? We are fully reliant on God for whatever we do in interacting with His people. Right? We don't always know the best course, although we think we do. And this idea of Solomon going, I am but a little child and I don't know how to go out or come in. Right? I don't know which ends up. I need your help. And the response from God is fantastic, isn't it? I mean, because this is another one of those things where we see that God doesn't just do what we ask. Right? He goes above and beyond. God's a giver above and beyond. Because you've asked for this, and not asked for other things like riches, honor, or for the life of your enemies, I'm going to give you the wisdom that you've asked for. Solomon's going to be the wisest, right? He's going to be the standard here. But I'm also going to give you more. I'm going to give you riches and honor. He also says that I noticed you didn't ask for long life, and I'll give that to you if. Right? If you walk in my statutes, then I'll lengthen your days. We're off to a good start. All right, we're off to a really good start. And we get to see Solomon's wisdom displayed. That's the very next thing. The very next thing is the one that's probably as famous about Solomon as anything. Verse 16, 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One woman said, "Oh, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house. I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. Then on the third day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. We were alone. There was no one else in the house with us. Only we two were in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she laid on him. And she arose at midnight, took my son from beside her while your servant slept, laid him at her breast, and laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my child, behold, he was dead. But I looked at him closely in the morning. Behold, he was not the child that I had born. But the other woman said, No, the living child is mine, and the dead child is yours. The first said, No, the dead child is yours, the living child is mine. And thus they spoke before the king. Then the king says, the one says, This is my son that is alive, and your son is dead. The other says, No, your son is dead, and my son's the living one. The king said, Bring me a sword. The sword was brought before the king, and the king said, Divide the living child in two, give half to one woman and half to the other. The woman whose son was alive said to the king, because her heart yearned for her son, O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means put him to death. But the other said, He shall be neither mine nor yours, divide him. The king answered and said, Give the living child to the first woman, and by no means put him to death. She's the mother. All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. It's an old one, and it may be one of the most famous of Solomon's judgments. Right? We see it. I mean, we see it just as clear as day that the woman who actually is the mother is going to love this child enough to say, "No, don't kill him." Right? We got that. But there's more to this. What happens to the woman whose baby died and tried to switch him? Doesn't say, does it? It doesn't appear, or at least, we can at least make this argument. The two women are identified to start with as prostitutes. This is not a good place to be. Women who were widowed or cast out by family that didn't have people to take care of them often turn to this. It's not a good place. We're already in a bad spot. Solomon never brings that up as he talks to them. The narrator never mentions it other than the beginning. That's it. The woman whose child lives receives her son back, and goes on. The other one, this is my assessment, and you can disagree with that's fine, because it really doesn't say, and this is just, it's kind of one of those things that I see, is that Solomon doesn't see the need to pile on here. And in this, we get a look at the wisdom of God and the judgment of God as discerning right and wrong, but also merciful in some way. Right? Again, we're off to a really good start. Okay, we've got time. Here we go. We're gonna just kind of bypass this. I don't mean that just to think it's not all that important, but chapter 4, verses 1 down through verse 19 is all of Solomon's administration. I mean, you can read that and see this. The main idea is there's a lot happening. He's got a lot of people. The kingdom is pretty busy. There's a lot of stuff going on. So I want us to skip down to verse 20. Judah and Israel were as many as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms, from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. And they brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour, 60 cores of meal, 10 fat oxen, and 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. For he had dominion over all the region west of the Euphrates, from the Tippish and Gaza, over all the kings of the west of the Euphrates, and he had peace on all sides around him. And Judah and Israel lived in safety from Dan even to Beersheba, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, all the days of Solomon. Solomon also had 40,000 stalls for horses, for his chariots, 12,000 horsemen. And those officers supplied provisions for King Solomon and for all who came to King Solomon's table, each one in his month. They let nothing be lacking. Barley also and straw for the horses and swift steeds they brought to the place where it was required, each according to his duty. And he shall not have for himself many horses or return back to Egypt to gather more. Okay, anyway, sorry. God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the east, and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Calcol, Darda, the sons of Mahal, and his fame was in all surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Usually deal in round numbers. I'm sorry, that one just kind of threw me. 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that's in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. And people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard his wisdom. We see just a glimpse, right? It's one of those summary statements that we'll see throughout. It's a glimpse of this is the kingdom. Peace on all sides. Solomon is incredibly powerful and influential, and he is wealthy. And everybody's doing fine. Okay? Hiram, the king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had anointed him king in place of his father, for Hiram always loved David. Solomon sent word to Hiram, "You know that David my father could not build a house for the name of the Lord because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side. There's neither adversary nor misfortune. And so I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord said to David my father, your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, shall build the house for my name. Now therefore command that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me, and my servants will join your servants, and I will pay you for servants such wages as you set. For you know that there is none among us, no one among us, who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians." Couple of little things, or maybe one big thing. Back when David says to Nathan, "I live in a house of cedar, the tent or the ark of God lives in a tent. I need to build a house for the ark of God." Nathan said, "Good idea," right? Whatever you have in mind, that's a good thing. Except for God shows up and speaks to Nathan and says, "No. In all the time that I dwelled with Israel, from the time I brought them out of Egypt, did I ever ask for this? Did not ask for this. But I will," I believe, if I'm remembering this right, what God says to David is, "No, I will build you a house. I will build you a dynasty. That one from your one of your descendants will sit on the throne." We will look forward to the coming of the Son of David in Jesus, the King who will reign forever. "And I will build for you this house." Solomon says David couldn't build one because there was too much trouble going on around him. But now that the Lord has given us rest, then I'm going to do what it is that God wanted, and for David's son to build a house. It's not exactly what was said. Okay? There's something missing. Solomon goes to the king to Hiram to get cedar. And as you read through the building of the temple, there's a lot of it. But never once that I see so far, and maybe I've missed it, but never once does Solomon say, should I do this? Does he? It's, I'm going to do this because this is how I understand this to go, right? That David couldn't build one. God wouldn't let him build one, but his son was going to, so obviously that's me, I can do it. And we move on with it. We don't hear, I don't believe, we hear from God in this matter for a little while. And it's that God says, okay. Right? If you build this, and this is a really rough paraphrase, we'll get to it in a minute and you'll hear the exact thing. But if you're going to do this, right, then I will dwell with my people here. This is a dangerous thing, but I'm going to do it. It's important, I think, I've maintained that it's important that we listen to and we do the best that we know how to obey what it is that God's commanded. Would you agree with that? Yes, okay, good deal. All right. We have a consensus. All right. However, I also think that there is the possibility that I don't always understand it right. Anybody else in that boat or just me? Okay. A lot fewer of you responding on that one. Okay, that's okay. Huh? I think one of the great things that I see in this, and I'm so thankful for, is that God will continue to work with and through us even if we don't have it right. Exactly. Even if we misunderstand it. That make sense? God's going to show up at the temple. His presence is going to dwell at the temple that Solomon builds in Jerusalem, even though it seems like, from what we've read before, that's not exactly what he wanted. Even though, as we work our way through Israelite history, all the way up through the time of Jesus and a little bit past, that the temple becomes something other than what it was supposed to be. And God knows this. But he works within incredibly flawed people that sometimes misunderstand exactly what he wants. Okay? And he can do that. Right? That doesn't mean, and here's the dangerous part, that doesn't mean we can go, doesn't really matter. Right? We can just do what we want. That's not it at all. It still means that we ought to pay attention and we ought to do the best we can to follow what it is that he's laid out for us as best we understand it. And we work this together with one another and we say, okay, I'm not sure about that, or I am sure about this, and we kind of struggle through this, but at the end of the day, it's what is it that we're trying to do for God here? Right? And understanding that we're not on his level. Okay? We don't know everything he does. And there's a possibility, as slim as it may be, that we may get something wrong. Okay? But that we can still be confident in the fact that he's not going, well, you're out. It's that he'll work with us in even those misunderstandings. Okay? That's all I want to say about that. All right. It goes through here about Solomon's the forced labor that he does. Chapter 5:13, drafted forced labor out of all Israel. The draft numbered 30,000 men. Sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. Being a month in Lebanon, 2 months back home. He also had 70,000 burden bearers, 80,000 stone cutters in the hill country, besides Solomon's 3,300 chief officers who were over the work, who had charge of the people, who carried on the work. At the king's command, They quarried out great, costly stones in order to lay the foundation of the house and dress stones. Let's start in chapter 6. In the 480th year, after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. The house that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. The vestibule in the front of the nave of the house was 20 cubits long, equal to the width of the house, and 10 cubits deep in front of the house. And he made for the house windows with recessed frames. He also built structures against the wall of the house, running around the walls of the house, both the nave and the inner sanctuary. And he made side chambers all around. The lowest story was 5 cubits broad, the middle one was 6 cubits broad, the third one was 7 cubits broad. For around the outside of the house he made offsets on the wall in order that the supporting beams should not be inserted into the walls of the house. When the house was built, it was with stone prepared at the quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor tool of iron was heard in the house while it was being built. The entrance for the lowest story was on the south side of the house, and one went up by stairs to the middle story, and from the middle story to the third. So he built the house and he finished it, and he made the ceiling of the house of beams and planks of cedar. He built the structure against the whole house 5 cubits high, and it was joined to the house with timbers of cedar. Now the word of the Lord came to Solomon concerning this house that you're building. If you'll walk in my statutes and obey my rules and keep all my commandments and walk in them, then I will establish my word with you, which I spoke to David your father. And I will dwell among the children of Israel and will not forsake my people. That's the only, that's where we hear God going, okay, you're building this, and I'll stay here. I will dwell with my people here. You have to walk in my statutes. I mean, this is still gonna go on. So about 24, 25 more verses are dedicated to the building of this temple and a lot of the detail that goes into it. All right? Then in chapter 7, we have a little bit of a break as Solomon builds his own house. And then we go back to the temple again and talk about the furnishings. Okay? We are not going to read all of that. Okay? We're just not. But we are going to stop and point out that there's a lot in there. And there's a lot that's given to us about how this is done. If you didn't catch it in those first few verses, I mean, it just goes on from there. Here's how big it is. Here's how much cedar we use. Here's how you went in. Here's the stairs you go up. All of this. There must be something to this. It reminds me of if we were to flip back a few books, we would run into the book of Exodus. When you run into the book of Exodus, it's a fantastic book. And the very first part of it, for quite a while, like 19, 20 chapters of this, is just one thing after another, right? You got a Pharaoh, you've got babies being thrown into the river, you got Moses' mother who saves him, you got Moses doing this, you got the plagues, you got all of this stuff. You got Israel coming out of Egypt. It's just one thing after another. It's movie of the week stuff, right? You can almost see Charlton Heston, can't you? Some of you can, right? But then it just comes to a screeching halt. Or the action in the book does. From chapter 19, really pretty much through the end of the book. And it repeats. And for those of us who have gotten used to the first part of Exodus, we get to that part of it and it just starts repeating. Now here's the tabernacle. Here's how big you need to make the ark. Here's where the rings go. Here's where the poles go. Here's the bases for the planks. Here's what the skins are to be made out of. Here's all the rings. Here's how all that works. Here's what size the basin is. Here's what the lampstand looks like, the altar of incense. all of that stuff. And it looks just like this. And then, when we think that's over, we go right back through it again and go, and here's how they built it, just exactly like what was said before. And we wonder to ourselves, why in the world is this here? Right? We got it the first time, right? For us reading it now, we go, we got it. This is the tabernacle. We could skip to the end in chapter 40 of going, and he set it up, and there it is, and God shows up. But it doesn't. It continues to repeat that, because this is the point of the Exodus. It's the point of the whole story. God with his people. That's why it stops. And that's why when you start reading about the tabernacle, the first thing that gets mentioned is the Ark of the Covenant, because that's the point of the whole thing. This is where God's going to meet with Israel. And when it comes to this building of the temple, they do much the same thing. Not quite as repetitive, because we don't have Solomon going to the mountain and getting the instructions from God. But we do have incredible detail on how this is done, because this is going to be the focus of the rest of it. This is going to play a huge role in the rest of Israel's history moving forward, is the temple. Now, there is something else that we need to notice about the temple, and we're going to do this. Oh, we've got time. Oh, we got loads of time. Here we go. I've just got a few verses that I've kind of underlined and highlighted, so we're going to kind of talk through those. In chapter 6, starting verse 17. The house, that is, the nave in front of the inner sanctuary, is 40 cubits long. The cedar within the house was carved in the form of gourds and open flowers. All was cedar, no stone was seen. Okay? Skip down to verse 29. Around all the walls of the house, he carved engraved figures, cherubim, palm trees, open flowers in the inner and outer room. The floor of the house he had overlaid with gold, the inner and outer rooms. Keep going. The entrance of the inner sanctuary, he made doors of olive wood. The lintel and doorposts were 5-sided. He covered the 2 doors of olive wood with carvings of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. He overlaid them with gold and spread gold on the cherubim and on the palm trees. He also made for the entrance to the nave doorpost of olive wood in the form of a square, 2 doors of cypress wood. 2 leaves of the one door were folding, and 2 leaves of the other door were folding, and on them he carved cherubim, palm trees, open flowers, and he overlaid them with gold and evenly applied on the carved work. You move over to the temple furnishings, and you'll start reading chapter 7, verse 15. Cast 2 pillars of bronze, 18 cubits was the height of one pillar, and a line of 12 cubits measured its circumference. It was hollow. Its thickness was 4 fingers. The second pillar was the same. Made 2 capitals of bronze and set on top of the pillars. The height of one capital was 5 cubits. The height of the other capital was 5 cubits. There were lattices of checker work with wreaths of chain work for the capitals on the tops of the pillars. Lattice for one capital and lattice for the other capital. Likewise, he made pomegranates in 2 rows around the one lattice work to cover the capital that was on the pillar. He did the same with the other one. This kind of language goes on and on. As he talks more about the temple furnishings, about the altar, you're going to find animals carved, right? Oxen, lions, those kinds of things. You're going to find things that are shaped like the lily. Okay? All of these kinds of things are in and around the temple. This is my guess, and I think it's a good one. Of course I do. It's mine. When you look at this continues something that's started a long time before. When you go back and look at if you look at the tabernacle, you find all kinds of fine linen, you find gold thread, you find all of these things and all of the different weavings and all of the things that go into the tabernacle. Because the tabernacle represents something else. And then you keep going back. And God planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and that's where he put Adam and Eve, who he had created. This imagery that's in the temple of palm trees and cedar and animals and flowers and pomegranates and gold and all kinds of beauty is the place where God dwells in the beginning with His creation. Eden is still thought of today, right? It's still thought of today as the paradise of God, right? This garden paradise that comes to mind. And we see this same imagery in the tabernacle. We see the same imagery in the temple, where God dwells with His people. This is why, I think, one of the reasons, it's just one among many, but it's why we have the detail we have about the temple. It's not that Solomon looked out and said, well, we need something for this. Go build me a shed. Right? It's understanding that this is where God's going to be. And where God's going to be is going to be the best. And in that dwelling, right, this is where God meets with His people. Okay, we got time. We want to fast forward. We want to fast forward all the way to the end of the book. All the way to Revelation, and we get this same kind of imagery. The same kind of imagery we have in Eden. Of a river that flows through Eden, and it waters in every direction. And in Revelation 21 and 22, we have, from the throne proceeds the water of the river of life. On either side is the tree of life. That's what it says in Revelation. Language of gates made of a single pearl, streets of gold that are transparent like glass, where God is. And where God meets with His people. So we see this theme. There's more to it, right? We can get into all kinds of fun stuff if you want. But when they start talking about the measurements, you talk about the measurements of the tabernacle, the most holy place is a perfect cube. Length, width, height. The most holy place in the temple is a perfect cube. In Revelation, as the holy city is measured, it is a perfect cube. This again is where God meets with His people, where God is with His people. And in between those, in between the temple, and in between what John sees as the holy city, we find somebody like Paul, who says, do you not know that you are the temple of God, where His Spirit dwells? If that's not somewhat of a motivator, for us, do we look at all of the places that where it shows God dwelling with His people throughout Scripture as it's an awesome place that you just think of just beauty and purity and attention to detail. Does that describe how we live? As people who are cleaning out the old for the dwelling place of God to be with us. The promise that Peter gives that's made in Acts 2, you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit that dwells in you. Does that not motivate us to take a look at the lives that we have and going, is this a fit dwelling place for the God who continually reaches out for us? we're going to end there. I know you're sad. It's 5 minutes early. But it is close to Christmas, so Merry Christmas. We'll pick up. With more of Solomon's rise and Solomon's fall with next week. Let's pray as we close. Father, we love you so much, and as we look closer at who you are and who you would have us to be, we notice the great difference. We're thankful, Father, that you've seen fit to help us be fit and acceptable temples for your presence. Father, we're in awe of your great wisdom, your sovereignty, your holiness. I'm so thankful that you're gracious and loving. And as we try, and as we focus on and try to pay attention to the things that you've left for us, and so that we can be the people that you've called us to be, that you work with us even in our far less than perfect understanding of it. But help us not to give up, but to continue to focus on you, and to thank you and to wonder and marvel at the fact that you want to be with us this badly. Thankful, Father, for our time together this morning. We love you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.